Hi everyone, welcome. It's another episode of the BC Poly Hot Stove live from the 7th floor of Metro Tower 3 in Burnaby, British Columbia. It's me. I'm Jordan Bateman, the Vice President of Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association.
I'm Maclean K. I'd have to stop and think. I'm on the very top floor, which is not 7 here in the BC legislature. I'm Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orca. Jordan, this week we have a target-rich environment of things to talk about.
Yeah, we were making the list, and it's not like there's like the huge, there's no House of Commons sitting, there's no legislature sitting, so you'd think it'd be quiet, but no, there's lots of things to talk about. But first of all, I want to say one thing, Maclean. I want to defend your honor against those folks at Unspun, the other podcast here on the Orca podcasting network. George Affleck made a joke, underscore says, he was kind of teasing you for being so large in the frame. But you know what I say, underscore? When you look as damn good as Maclean K, you want to be close to the camera. It's uggles like me and underscore who want to be farther back. That's what I say, Maclean.
Doesn't explain Jody, but yes, I like this theory. We're going to go with it. And I think every week I should have progressively bigger earphones until they're actually too big to fit on the screen. I like this idea. Let's run with it.
Boom. Honor defended. Okay, let's talk about the
roasted George Affleck. Sorry, George.
Let's talk about the big splash. And I know on the format sheet you had my big splash first, but I want to talk about yours first. The Ottawa professor who had his own basket of deplorables moment.
Yeah. First of all, we've just revealed that we have a format sheet. No one will believe that. Speaking of fake news, you know the tweet we're talking about. You know what? I'm not going to mention his name because I don't want any more abuse.
You don't remember his name, do you?
I don't. I have no clue what his name is. He's the one. He tweeted an abacus poll and then said that conservatives are the party of the uneducated. There's a couple reactions to this. The first thing I'm going to say is something that Mark Marison pointed out, is that no, this person does not speak for the Liberal Party of Canada, and that's true. However, it is a very sort of Liberal of Party Canada sin. The other thing I wanted to do is I know you're going to have lots to say about this, but I wonder if he actually looked at the poll he was quoting, because I have. And what it shows is that, yes, people with a postgraduate degree choose the Liberal Party over every other party in Canada, actually 51%. But when you get to college and bachelor's degree, it's within the margin of error. People with college degree actually prefer conservatives, 33 to 31. And with a bachelor's degree, it goes the other way. It's the Liberals 35 to the Conservatives 31. So when he says the party of the uneducated, what he's actually talking about is people with postgraduate degrees, which is, surely he's not implying those of us who do not have postgraduate degrees are not uneducated. The other point I want to make is this. He made this about the Conservatives, and fair enough. But really, if he wants to imply that people with postgraduate degrees are smarter than the rest of us and therefore pick Conservatives, why is he picking on the Conservatives, who are at the very worst a close second? The NDP, only 10% of those with a postgraduate degree have picked the NDP as their first choice. 9% of Greens. And those numbers are similar down you go. So while, yes, it is accurate to say that those with a high school degree or less prefer Conservatives, 37 to 25, it is simply not accurate to say what he said. We're getting into the details and weeds here, but it just smacks of the worst kind of elitism. I will forgive a great many sins. I cannot stand snobbery. It's one of those things that I detest. And to see it in Canadian politics like this, especially when it's inaccurate, drives me crazy. I know you're going to have a lot to say about
this. Is great. I thought I was the ranter on the show, but this is fantastic. I'm just going to eat my popcorn and listen to Maclean shred this guy. Listen, he's a University of Ottawa professor, so stop right there. This explains a lot. So he's locked in this Ottawa/academia bubble. He thinks he's better than everyone else. God forbid that the hinterlands vote for anyone other than his preferred candidate. And God forbid they vote on any other issue than the one he thinks is most important. You're right. It is elitism at its worst. And, it just... This is a bit of a hot button for me because during the TransLink referendum back in the day, the elites were all lined up on one side of this argument, and we're constantly deriding the average commuter, the average person who is just trying to get to work every day. Listen, in politics, I've said this before and I'll say it 1,000 times again, I'm sure. In politics, it's really easy to think that everyone lives like you or should live like you. And that is just not the case. There are a myriad of, the great thing about Canada is there's, incredible wealth. There's poverty as well, unfortunately. There's healthy people, there's unhealthy people. There's people who vote for all sorts of different reasons. Just run for public office once. You'll find out, the reasons you're running, not necessarily the reasons why people are voting for or against you. It is a wide swath of people. And that's what we want. It's what we want.
Exactly.
So,
it's called diversity.
Exactly. And so when I hear this guy, kind of like it was a snotty tone, looking down the party of the uneducated, it really offended me. And no wonder why I went crazy on Twitter, where, frankly, the liberal elite types, have sort of a foothold on Twitter. Like, I would say that they are the dominant force on Twitter in Canada. It's a little bit opposite in the States, where the center or where the right wing, I think, has more of an influence on Twitter than maybe the left. But in Canada, certainly the left is all over Twitter. It just feeds into that ridiculous narrative. The numbers don't add up. And here you go. If this helps you, University of Ottawa prof, I do have a postgraduate degree, and I will proudly vote Conservative this fall. And apparently you only want to listen to people with postgrad degrees, so listen to me. You look like an asshole and an idiot. I'm sorry. There's just no other way to put it. I think you did a lot more damage to your cause than you did any kind of good. Yeah, we don't. We need better debates in Canada. Like, this is the kind of stuff. This is the basket of deplorable stuff. This is Mitt Romney's 47% stuff. This is the kind of thing we want to avoid in our politics in Canada. And this, idiot academy professor just dives right into it. And now people are trudging up his history, like he's made human rights complaints because he didn't get certain chairs and fellowships and things like that. Like, this guy's living in a real glass house here.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to grab on something you said there, where it's not helpful. I mean, people who know us reasonably well will know that my work history in the past has included work with the federal Liberals, including for Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. So I'm not someone who's immediately disposed to hate on the party. That said, this is exactly the kind of thing that federal Liberals occasionally are guilty of, which is sort of a snobbery and elitism. And as this professor, who I presume wants to see Prime Minister Trudeau reelected this fall, he must be bright enough to know that this in no way helps.
Well, they are Canada's natural governing party, Maclean.
Right, so dum-dum's not welcome is not a message that is going to sell in the fall. It's no one likes a snob. I'm not alone in this. And as I say, the worst part of all this is that he's decided to pick on the party that finished second in every one of those measures, which is crazy. And it's a close second almost across the board. So I mean, this is a criticism that could just as well be, and probably according to the data, be more justifiably leveled at the NDP and Green Party, but that's not where he went. And so, I mean, it's just this. He should be smart enough to know that this kind of selective interpretation of data is not only wrong, it's not helpful.
Yeah, and he's, it hasn't backpedaled at all. In fact, he's doubled, tripled, and quadrupled down on it. Catherine Marshall, a very accomplished lawyer in Toronto, mom of two, and just happens to be married to Hamish Marshall, the Conservative Party's national campaign manager. She kind of called him out on this, as did hundreds of other Conservatives. And frankly, several federal Liberals who, like Mark Merrison, who disavowed him. And he said, "Oh, Catherine, I know your secret. I know you're married to Hamish Marshall." Dude, it's not a secret. Like, just because you don't know something until you Google it doesn't mean it's a secret. Like, she posts pictures of her and Hamish, and so I tweeted back like, "Look, don't tell them that you guys have actually reproduced twice with two beautiful children, Catherine and Hamish, because then, boy, the conspiracy will really be out." It's just this. It just was such a boneheaded thing. It just triggers all the arguments. Why do we have tenure for idiots like this? Like, University of Ottawa must just be shaking their head on it.
I get that sometimes too. People accusing me of finding out my secret of my work history, which is, as I've pointed out to a couple people, it's on the site.
Yeah.
It's not a secret.
Yeah.
I'm actually proud of it, and it's there if you want to look. So yeah, it's ridiculous. It drags down the level of debate in this country, and it's not helpful for anyone.
No, exactly. All right, my big splash. Shifting gears slightly, the Conservatives making a little bit of hay this week. It turns out that in the dying days of the last House of Commons session, that the Trudeau government snuck in a new clean fuel standard. Now, this is actually something we already have in British Columbia, and it's something that John Horgan doesn't really want you to know about because it actually costs consumers more because there are certain things that have to be done with the gasoline in the refining process that make it more expensive. So the estimate is it's going to increase the cost of gasoline by somewhere between 5 and 10 cents per liter, depending on who you talk to. This is on top, of course, of the carbon tax and all the other taxes are costing more money. Listen, tough to run on this idea that you're trying to make life more affordable for the middle class, which I do think Trudeau is trying to do, when you're constantly ratcheting up the price of one thing that the middle class buy a lot of, and that's gasoline. And you're not proud enough of it to come out and admit it. You're actually hiding it, and it just kind of comes out via regulation rather than via some sort of announcement or tying it into a climate strategy or something like that. I also think it affects John Horgan's fake gas price review, which is all about trying to shift blame from government taxes. And look, NDP taxes, BC Liberal taxes, SoCred taxes, they all increased taxes on gasoline over the years. But trying to shift blame from government policy onto the oil companies. I looked at the Parkland refinery submission to this thing. They make a pretty compelling case that, hey, start by looking in the mirror, government, if you want to reduce gasoline prices. So it'll be interesting to see at the end of this summer, how the media take whatever the BC Utilities Commission puts out as far as oil prices and gas prices and what the oil companies are doing, and measure it against the fact that there are obvious government policies, whether it's clean fuel standards, whether it's direct gas taxes, whether it's carbon tax. There are direct, cost drivers there by government. So I have no idea how the media will take it in the dying days of the summer, but we shall see.
Well, and I hope that somebody, and I'm looking at you, Blair King, and people like that, might do a study of their own just to sort of fill out the rest of the story. Because as you say, the inquiry is only focused on one aspect of the story, but that's not even remotely the whole picture. Luckily, most of this information should be at least reasonably public, and so hopefully someone will do the work that we can sort of use in conjunction with the results of this gas inquiry to get a real picture as to what drives gas prices in BC. Because it is not the oil companies. It is not just the oil companies. And to suggest that government taxes play no role whatsoever is, well, it's pretending. And again, it's not about the NDP. It's not about the BC Liberals. It's not about the SoCreds. You're exactly right. It's government taxation.
Yeah, and look, the NDP want us to use less fuel. They're concerned. They want us to do better things for the environment. Mm-hmm. And part of the way they plan to do that is by escalating carbon tax year after year after year, making it more and more expensive. So this is actually the very result the social engineers in government want. So I just don't understand why they don't come out and say, look, yeah, it's uncomfortable, but we're trying to shift you off gasoline to cheaper sources. At least for all of his nonsense, at least Andrew Weaver came out and says, refinance your house and buy yourself that electric car. Like, at least he comes out and says it. Horgan pretends, no, we're not really doing this, but we're really doing this, right? Like, at least he's not a hypocrite like Horgan.
Yeah, he's walking the walk, and credit to him for that, even though it's not a walk that most of us can afford.
Yeah, he looks out of touch and elitist in a different way, but at least he's not a hypocrite. And so I will give Andrew Weaver the slight victory over John Horgan for not being hypocritical on that. All right, that was the front burner issues, back burner issues. Tell me about Project Reconciliation.
Yeah, Project Reconciliation is one of the proposals in front of, I guess, well, this is the news. It's in front of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Apparently, as of yesterday, it's an formal offer to buy a majority stake in the Trans Mountain Pipeline project. I think it's a 51% stake. Now, Project Reconciliation is interesting because it's a collection of Indigenous groups, and to the best of my knowledge, it's entirely Indigenous. Were this to happen, not only would it mean that Ottawa would have successfully sold a majority stake in the Trans Mountain project they bought, as you may recall, but having it owned by Indigenous groups would certainly make it tricky for the narrative that First Nations oppose this pipeline, which you hear over and over and over again, even though, again, it's not true. Some do, yes, but a majority do not. And so to have the pipeline actually owned by Indigenous interests, well, that would turn a lot of narratives on their head and certainly make the debate more interesting. From what I've heard, it's a credible offer, whether Ottawa chooses to take it or not, or chooses to look at other offers as their right. We shall see. But at the very least, this represents a very interesting development in the ongoing Trans Mountain saga.
Yeah. Can you imagine, Maclean, if they actually did sell the 50% or 51% or whatever to a First Nations group? Then you'd have people like this dummy from Ontario protesting grandpa this morning who got arrested at the Westridge terminal trying to protest tankers, climbing a crane with wetsuits and all sorts of gear to try to hang a no tankers banner, which, by the way, an act of trespass, putting himself in danger, putting police in danger, having to get him down, all of which sanctioned by Stand.Earth, and shame on them for this, putting people's lives in danger and hiding behind their computer keyboards and sending out donor emails while real folks are endangering themselves. Anyways, we could actually take this guy and charge him with a human rights complaint if he was opposing a First Nations owned pipeline, right? Like, it would just open up a whole delicious kind of smorgasbord of options to fight back against these nonsense protesters.
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, take a hypothetical example. Imagine somebody is diametrically opposed to the fishing industry for whatever reason. They sabotage a commercial fishing trawler out of, I don't know, Port Alberni. That's a crime. Would you not agree that it would be at least treated as a more serious crime if they were to sabotage a First Nations fishing boat on the Fraser River? The crime is the same, but I think most of us would agree that it would at least be treated with more gravity when he or she did this to a First Nations boat. That will instantly become the case with Trans Mountain, and so. You're right. Very interesting and a lot more difficult and complicated for the people who do oppose this project for whatever reason.
Yeah, my sense is probably won't do any kind of sale before the election. It just would be too politically hot. But perhaps after the election, I think both the Trudeau Liberals and the Scheer Conservatives would very likely want to try to offload this onto someone. So.
Well, and they did just receive the formal offer apparently yesterday, and there are maybe more offers from Indigenous groups coming. So it might not even be the worst decision to give them their due consideration and read them and then compare them to other offers. So meaning, to be fair to the Prime Minister's office, it might make more sense to at least wait through the summer. But you're right. I think political considerations would probably make it necessary to wait until after the election.
Yeah, and then in a kind of a secondary story, Eagle Spirit Pipeline, which is one that was proposed for northern BC, also Aboriginal owned, and Aboriginal supported, owned, all of that, but pretty much dead because of the tanker ban that Trudeau rushed through on the north coast. They're now saying that, well, maybe they'll go through Alaska and go out an Alaskan port, meaning that Canadian energy flows out of an American port, again, giving Americans more money and more control over our national energy. Not great, but it's exactly the kind of thing that groups like ours, like ICBA, talked about when this tanker ban was rushed through. So, still lots to talk about when it comes to energy politics in this country, and I imagine this will be a big issue coming this fall. Whether you have a post-secondary degree or not, this will be a big issue this fall. Speaking of the fall, the race is tightened. So we have basically the Conservatives and the Liberals now in a statistical tie within the margin of error. You have trailing behind with about half of what the CPC have. You have the NDP, and then a few points behind them, you have the Green Party. The Green Party seemed to be surging at one point, going from 4 or 5% in the polls to 10 or 12%. They seem to have stalled out now. The NDP seem to be hovering between 15 and 17, and then you have the two big parties kind of at 1/3 each. Maclean, are we heading for the dreaded thing of all, a minority government?
Polls indicate that is at the very least possible, if not even likely. You know what? It's July. There's still months and the actual campaign to come. So I mean, it is so hard to make. It's like projecting next year's NFL draft before the college season hasn't even been played yet. Yes, it's interesting to see them tightening up, and I agree with you on a couple of the points you made going in that I think Green support has there's a ceiling there. around 10 to 15%, and it's hard to see it going above that nationally. And the ongoing story of the NDP support continuing to trend down is obviously not good news. This is going to be neck and neck between the Liberals and the Conservatives, and it's going to be a question of where their support is. It's much like the case in the last U.S. presidential election. It didn't do Hillary Clinton much good to run up the score in places like California and New York, electorally speaking only, while Donald Trump took more states. And we might see a slightly similar situation in Canada where, the Liberals might just blow the Conservatives out of the water in downtown Toronto. But, in places like the 905 suburbs in Ontario and across the prairies, there'll be actually more seats in play that the Conservatives might have a chance in. So this is a very long-winded way of saying it is still very, very early. If you're the Conservatives, I think you think this is good news, but I don't think they're panicking in Liberal HQ just yet.
Mm-hmm. I saw Doug Ford was in Calgary for the Stampede. Mm-hmm. Should the federal Conservatives basically pay Jason Kenney to kidnap Doug Ford and keep him in Alberta for the next 3 months? Because it seems to me that
probably be the best move.
Yeah, the Ontario Liberals are not in Ontario. The Liberals are not running against Andrew Scheer. They're running against Doug Ford and trying to tie Scheer to Ford every way they can, which tells me two things. Number one, they don't have a lot on Scheer that they can battle him with, and number two, it's a tribute to just how quickly Ford's popularity has dried up.
Well, even those who aren't going to vote for Doug Ford or never going to vote for Doug Ford, I mean, it's a smart play. The people who dislike Doug Ford really dislike him in Ontario, and I think that if I'm a Liberal strategist, I would do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it's like Jason Kenney in Alberta running against Rachel Notley, never mentioning Notley, but mentioning how she was always Trudeau's buddy.
Yeah,
that's it's that same age-old politics. Now, you do mention 3 months to go still to the election, so it's hard to tell. I know Jerry Butts, the deposed Trudeau whisperer, he likes to tweet out polls that, from 4 years ago showing the Liberals were nowhere. I do think that, a little bit different situation, and Jerry, I think, would admit a little bit different situation now that Trudeau is a known quantity. If anything, that probably, Scheer is more the parallel to than what Trudeau has done. So we will see. We shall see. There's still stuff coming out on the Mark Norman case. There's I'm going to talk about John McCallum a little bit later. The Liberals are in that part of their mandate where all of their self-inflicted wounds are starting to bleed out, and eventually the public starts to pick up on a narrative here.
Hey, let's talk about self-inflicted wounds as we get into who's hot and who's cold in politics. I think you should probably go first. It's not BC farmers that have inflicted this wound, but they're hot right now, aren't they?
Well, BC farmers, I want to give a shout out to them. So, I'm an old Langley Township councillor, 2 terms. 80% of Langley Township is in the Agricultural Land Reserve. Very few communities as sensitive to what goes on with the ALR as Langley is. We've had to deal with it for a long, long time as we've grown a population in the urban pockets and tried to protect farmland. BC farmers today are better organized and angrier than I've ever seen them on the public policy front. There's multiple Facebook groups sprouting up. There's a website. There's different farmers associations popping up. And it's because of this myriad of weird things that Lana Popham and John Horgan have done, basically to rob farmers of their property rights. Now, farmers understand that, it's a sacred trust. They get taxed at a lower rate. In return, they don't get to do exactly what they want with their properties. It's subject to the Agricultural Land Reserve. I think they understand that. But they are taking great offense at not being considered people anymore under the Act, not being able to actually apply for different things, at least going forward to the ALC. They have to go and get local government to do it for them, or a First Nation ban, which kind of is especially difficult for a number of these farmers. Given that they don't have those kind of depths of relationships. There's new rules around the size of houses you can build. There's new rules on what you can do to replace an old house, on adding a secondary dwelling either for family or for workers, what you can use it for, subdividing property. Like, all of these new rules have come in, and it all comes down to Lana Popham, who loves a good photo op, and look, her Twitter is full of them. There she is in a cranberry bog in Fort Langley, and there she is over there. The truth is, a lot of these farmers, marijuana is another issue. Seeing these farms turn into giant marijuana factories. Farmers are fed up. They're organizing, And if you're wondering why we're not in the middle of a provincial election campaign or why we just didn't have a vote in June, it's precisely because these farmers are in a lot of swing ridings and starting to flex their muscle, and they are mad at John Horgan and Lana Popham.
The weird thing about this is I can't even really grasp what it is that Lana Popham and the provincial government were attempting to do. This just feels like unnecessarily prescriptive. Yeah. And I just don't. And I mean, if you have been watching the show for a while, you'll know that one of my defaults is to at least try and understand why the mistake was made. This is one of those ones where I'm kind of baffled. I don't see
religion. It's
what
ideology.
They were going for. Yeah, I guess that's what it is.
It's blind religion. So look, the ALR was one of the 4 or 5 kind of crown jewels of the very first NDP government under Davy Barrett in the 70s, when he decided in 1972 that all farmland that was being farmed in 1972 shall forever remain farmland in British Columbia. Here we are, 50 years later, and guess what? Things have changed in certain places. Maybe we should look at it again. But God forbid we do, because farmland is sacred. So, for them, this is gospel. When you're an NDPer, you grow up on the legend of Davy Barrett, deposing that evil W.A.C. Bennett who only, wanted to, build stuff. God forbid, Davy Barrett is your champion, your hero, like that whole kind of ALC, ICBC. These are sacred things that NDPers have given, to British Columbians to protect. So, the problem is these guys, no one in caucus has farmed. No one knows what the farming issues are. Like, no one's willing to listen to the actual people who own the land. And frankly, they don't consider these people who own the farmland to actually be the owners. They're merely custodians or stewards of the farmland that we as a communal society owns, in NDP
Very
land.
feudal, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's absolute garbage because, government doesn't put in any money to help these farmers. Government's not taking any of the risks. Government is, you look at housing costs and the way government's driven those up, taxation and fees and all that sort of stuff. There's no place for farm workers to live, so farmers are trying to deal with that. Like, it is government. It's that classic Reagan line, right? Like, the scariest words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." So Lana Popham runs around the province, patting herself on the back for putting local food into hospitals, as if that's going to somehow rejuvenate the farming industry in British Columbia. And you've got farmers saying, "Look, I just want to house my elderly parents who friggin' farmed this land for 40 years and pass it on to me." It just drives me crazy. So sorry, I'm more wound up on that than the elitist Ottawa prof, because I've seen this over and over again in Langley. Government making it more and more difficult for farmers to have a livelihood. And we've talked about this before. The number one cash crop on a lot of these farms is the cell phone tower, because government's made it so difficult in order to actually farm the land, in order to do stuff, to get the workers necessary to do the work, in order to provide the foods and whatnot that we require.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And it's, as you say, it's disappointing when sort of unthinking dogma gets in the way of good public policy, or sound public policy, as our friend Andrew Weaver would say. And so, this is one of those ones where I have trouble even seeing the other side.
Yeah, it's 50 years ago. We can talk about these things and say, hey, does all of Richmond need to have, or does big chunks of Richmond need to have ALR land, or would housing be a better option for it? Like, we can have these conversations. It's not sacrilegious, right? Like, it's okay. We can have these conversations. Maybe we decide that, Delta, Langley, like, maybe there's a parcel here that should be in or out or whatever. We can talk about these things. Like, things change over 50 years. It's okay. Same with ICBC. It's a frustrating thing for someone like me who actually, has seen how local government's been treated by the Agricultural Land Commission under a BC Liberal government. It wasn't easy. The NDP just keep making matters worse.
Speaking of blowing things up and frustrating, I want to talk about my hot politician this week. And this is something that this wasn't a pick I would have made until last night. I want to talk about Dan Davies, who's the BC Liberal MLA in one of the Peace River ridings. I want to say Peace River South. I always get those two confused. Anyway, last night, Dan tweeted a story, an op-ed he wrote himself for the Alaska Highway News, the local newspaper in his riding, expressing some frustration about there's a program that the NDP government government announced in Vancouver. It was basically free symphony tickets. And his point was that not that that was a bad thing, but it was incredibly frustrating for him and the people in his community who are struggling with some of the issues you just described, but especially the ongoing forestry issues, to see, the NDP celebrating free symphony tickets in Vancouver, while, communities like Dawson Creek and Fort St. John are really struggling. Now, again, when he tweeted it, he copied myself and a few other people here in the press gallery, I believe Tom Fletcher, Keith Baldry, and wow, have my mentions exploded. Not just from people liking and retweeting Dan's original tweet of the column, but some of the responses. And, it's kind of troubling. I do believe that, yes, governments can walk and chew gum at the same time. But that's not what some of the people who were angry at Dan were tweeting back. They were saying things along the lines of, well, tough. Your government did this and this, so you have no right to complain. And it's too bad for these people. They should have college degrees. It's kind of troubling. So the reason I wanted to bring this up is, again, it's not to criticize this program of free symphony tickets in Vancouver. It's to illustrate the frustration that is happening in some parts of the province of a perceived lack of awareness or even caring of the problems that they're suffering in places like Vancouver. And so that's why I think this week my hot politician is Dan Davies.
Yeah, I was a little surprised at how quickly Baldry dismissed him. I
didn't even see Keith's response.
Almost disdainfully. And, Keith Baldry, local Robert Redford impersonator at the legislature, I love Baldry to bits, but I kind of stepped back and was like, whoa, that was a very Victoria, urban, BC kind of tweet response, right? Look, symbolic gestures matter. If symbolism didn't matter in politics, we would never have heard of Bevoda and $16 orange juice. We would never have heard of David Dingwall and I'm entitled to my entitlements and expensing chewing gum. We would never have heard of, Bevoda again smoking in her office and doing nonsense like that. We would never have heard of the, end the clawback, which made Michelle Mungal famous, right? These are issues. Symbolism matters. And so when you're a forestry worker, and you're out of work, when you're in Vavenby, British Columbia, and 170 families are out of work, and there's only 700 people in your town, you sit back and go, why the hell are they doing this? Why are they giving free money for symphony tickets when I don't know how I'm going to feed my kids next week? That is the symbolism involved here.
It's true.
And this comes back almost to where we started, which is, we should have saved this for last in order to, complete the circle. If we were polished like Jody Vance, we would have. But, it comes back to this idea that people in the bubble are totally disconnected with what's going on out there in the so-called hinterlands, or the heartlands, as Gordon Campbell would call them. We've got to do better. You've got to step back and say, listen, okay, maybe this isn't about symphony tickets. Maybe this is about desperation of that, from constituents that Dan Davies is hearing from. There was a great video from Penticton that came out yesterday, 2.5 minutes, uncut.
Oh, yeah.
Of a woman named Jean from Penticton, and she sees Andrew Scheer across the way doing some door knocking. And she jumps out of her car. She's an elderly lady, comes over to Andrew Scheer, and Scheer's tall and she's short. And she's like, I've been hoping to meet you because my son in Calgary is 53 years old. He's been out of work for 2 years, trying everything he can, trying to provide for his family. We have to do something for the energy industry. And I'm watching this video, and I can feel this mother's pain, and I can feel the son. The son isn't there. He's in Calgary. He's trying to I can feel what would it be like to be out of work, and trying to care for your family. This would be terrible. And there's this disconnect, right? Forestry is a big issue, and whatever the cause is, and there's a myriad of causes, not all of them limited to British Columbia politicians. It's okay to say, look, we need to, be really careful with the symbolism of what we're saying to those people who are out of work right now. There was a program announced by the government, and they're retraining 60 forestry workers. Well, there are 4,400 out of work already, and thousands more coming. 60 is not enough. And you retrain 60 and pat yourself on the back like we've done a great job for, helping people. No, this is the same government that's fighting a pipeline where some of those people could go and work construction jobs to at least kind of get them through this really lean time. But it was so perfectly illustrative of the rural versus urban divide in this province. Where, it's great. Okay, so I can apply for symphony tickets to, take my kid to hear, incredible music, classical music, fantastic, because I happen to live in the Lower Mainland. But meanwhile, Vavenby is going to be a ghost town in a few weeks.
Yeah, the people who criticized Nero for fiddling while Rome burned were not anti-fiddling.
Yeah, no, exactly.
It's the fiddling. The fiddle is not the problem,
Yeah,
and the symphony and the free tickets in Vancouver are not the problem. In fact, that's probably a good thing.
yeah.
But as you say, the symbolism. God, it must be hard to swallow in a place where the entire town's future is very much in doubt.
Yeah, it's not Dan Davies' job, by the way, to explain to his constituents, well, these symphony tickets are a good thing. It's Dan Davies' job to represent his constituents and to do whatever it takes in the House, out of the House, in meetings with ministers, in meetings with the press, to say this is an important issue to my people, to my constituents, to my friends, to my neighbors. They have got to be heard here. And I think that's what he's doing. And I was really disappointed with how quickly some in the press gallery just dismissed the piece. I get it. I get it. You know, there's this whole cottage industry right now in the media where anytime a BC Liberal criticizes the NDP government for something that they're doing, it comes back to, well, you had 16 years, and what about this, and what about this, and what about this? I get it. You know, it's politics. At the same time, we can still hold the NDP to account for what's going on now, and we must. Otherwise, you know, we as reporters, as pundits, as analysts, are not serving the interests of British Columbia well. Let's hold this government to account, not just give them a free pass because hey, the BC Liberals ended bus passes 7 years ago. Like, it's okay. Like, we can start to hold these guys to account.
Well, and at a certain point, you kind of have to let the past go and say, like, they are the official opposition, regardless of how they got there. And as you say, they are just doing their job.
Yeah, and this is the same press gallery who thinks they're not doing a great job opposing. Well, here's a great example. I think this is exactly what, I sit there and go, okay, well, let's talk about the great oppositions in history. And they're usually NDP oppositions because that's their natural habitat. But, you're like, okay, what would Michelle Mungal, opposition critic, have done on this? Exactly what Dan Davies would have done, right? Like,
that's true.
Precisely what Dan Davies would have done. And people would have been like, oh, she's a pit bull on this issue. Oh, she's not going to let this go. She's going to keep fighting until we get it through. And then when, it changes, oh, congratulations, Michelle, you defend. And now she's in cabinet. Like, I get it. Like, this is what oppositions do. They bring attention to these things. And kudos to Dan Davies. It's not often that someone from the piece breaks through on Twitter, but you're certainly doing it. And I'm hopeful that inspires more of your colleagues to step forward and bravely go out there and oppose these damaging NDP policies.
That's who's hot. Do you want to go first on who's cold?
Yeah, who's cold? Who's cold? Really quickly, John McCallum. He was fired as the ambassador to China by Prime Minister Trudeau back in the spring when he was made some comments over Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou's extradition. Now he's back for some reason giving interviews to the South China Morning Post. And I got to read this quote because if this was Donald Trump and Russia, the liberal establishment, even in this country, would be going bananas. But because it's John McCallum, former liberal cabinet minister, and being supportive of Trudeau, they seem to think it deserves a free pass. But here's McCallum's quote. Quote, anything that is more negative against Canada, this is to China, will help the Conservatives, who are much less friendly to China than the Liberals. I hope, and I don't see any reason why things will get worse. It would be nice if things would get better between now and Canada's election in October, essentially saying, hey, China, the Liberals are a lot friendlier to you than a Conservative government would be, so you got to be nice to us right now so that we can get reelected and kind of, make sure that our relationship, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, stays firm and stays healthy. Guess what? Things aren't healthy between Canada and China right now. China has two hostages, essentially because we happen to have followed the U.S. Extradition rules on Meng Wanzhou. This is the kind of stuff that just boggles my mind, right? Like, if this was about Russia and Trump said, oh, Russia, the Democrats will be a lot less favorable to you than I will, so, you should make sure that you are helping me get reelected by making things look good right now, people would be going absolutely crazy, but it's Trudeau and McCallum, and so I guess it's okay.
At the very most charitable possible interpretation of this is that the optics are disastrous, and that is like the absolute highest I can go. This was yeah, it's embarrassing, is what this is, quite frankly.
It's Bush League. All right, the coldest politician. I think you've just given him a regular seat in the freezer here, haven't you?
I felt bad. It's summer. There's not much going on. I had to go with. I saw a piece in the Tyee. I want to say earlier this week. I apologize if I've got the time wrong. And it was basically a plea for Jagmeet to take a very hard left turn because this reasonable stuff, as they put it, is just not working. Look, if Jagmeet Singh is too right wing for you, then I suggest that. One almost feels bad for Jagmeet. I mean, he can't win. He has, I think, inarguably taken the NDP policy-wise much further to the left than did Thomas Mulcair, or at least he wants to. And it's just you can't win these people. They want Bernie Sanders, although I think Jagmeet's in that realm. They want Jeremy Corbyn, who is under fire for being an anti-Semite as of yesterday again. So I mean, if Jagmeet can't please the extreme left fringe of his own party, then I suspect he is in some real trouble.
Yeah, this idea that he's being too reasonable or too centrist is nonsense. Like, read his tax policy. It is atrocious. It would cripple investment in this country. Jobs would plummet. I mean, you would put us into a recession by enacting his particular brand of taxation politics. I think, this fall, look, the NDP are going to get wiped out. They're going to lose more than half their caucus this fall. I think the numbers have been pretty steady on that. Jagmeet doesn't seem to be breaking through at all. Jagmeet will get turfed out or resign shortly thereafter. I think this is the Leap Manifesto's time, right? They're laying the groundwork now to take over that party after this election. And whether it's a Nikki Ashton or someone else who will end up leading it, they're going to attack very, 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 very hard left. Not great for Canadian politics for sure.
No, I agree. And as I say, if Jagmeet Singh is not left wing enough for you, then you exist on a pretty far out there fringe. Is all I'll say.
And they're like these NDPers, they're knifing him all over the place. Like Sven Robinson should he should almost rip up Sven Robinson's nomination papers, because with friends like Sven Robinson, you don't need enemies. And then there was that story this week that came out that he'd only been to one fundraiser all year, and they ran it. In the end, Sven Robinson, I can't believe it. We need to be raising money, blah, blah, blah. And then NDP headquarters comes out and says, no, he's been to lots of fundraisers, just not the big ticket ones, because we're a party of the grassroots and the people, not of, the max donors. Okay. But that sure took a long time for them to come out with, right? This went into a news cycle or two, and now everyone thinks he's never been to a fundraiser, when in fact he hasn't been to the fancy gala ones that Trudeau prefers, which is probably what you want to do when you're an NDP leader.
Yeah, and that was actually a point I wanted to make, and then got lost along the way. Is that he lost control of that narrative, which was, I mean, in Singh's defense, seemed to be factually untrue.
Yeah. That
they do have a different model of fundraising, and that's fair enough. And he has been, I guess, active within that model. But I mean, the last few months, you could take every story that Sven Robinson is in, is that Sven Robinson is unhappy that ... and just fill in the blanks from there. It's Mad Libs after that.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. All right. That is it for the Hot Stove. We will be back next week. Double checking my calendar. Yes, we will be back next week at The Orca BC, facebook.com/The Orca BC. By the way, theorca.tv if you want to go straight to our YouTube channel. You know that. Oh, and one more thing. For our podcasts, we are on all the major platforms, including if you have a Google Home or a Alexa, just say, hey, hey Google, play me the latest Orca podcast, and it will. I know this because I tried it at home.
There you go. And we're a Spotify household, and we are there as well.
Exactly. We are everywhere you want to be. Thank you for watching. We will see you all again next week.